Hello students. Today we are going to start a new chapter, chapter number 5, quality. It is in your honeycomb book and this is the story of a shoemaker, Mr. Jessler. And this wonderful story is written by great author John Glassworthy. So let's start the story, quality. Shoemaker be called an artist? Yes, if he has the same skill and pride in the trade as any other artist, and the same respect for it too. Mr. Gessler, a German shoemaker, settled in London, is a perfect artist. Read this story to see how he devotes his life to his art. This chapter is quality and it is written by John Glassworthy, a novelist and the great author. So, before reading this chapter and explaining the chapter, we just discuss about the John Glassworthy. John Glassworthy, born on August 14, 1867, Kingston Hill, Surrey, England. English novelist and playwright, winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1932. Glassworthy's family of Devonshire farming stock traceable to the 16th century had made a comfortable fortune in property in the 19th century. His father was a solicitor, educated at Harrow and New College, Oxford. Glassworthy was called to the bar in 1890. With a view to specialization in marine law, he took a voyage around the world, during which he encountered Joseph Conrad, then mate of a merchant ship. They became lifelong friends. Glassworthy found law uncongenial and took to writing. For his first work, From the Four Winds, 1897, a collection of short stories, and the novel Jocelyn, 1898, both published at his own expense. He used the pseudonym John St. John. The Island Pharisees, 1904, was the first book to appear under his own name. The Man of Property, 1906, began the novel sequence known as the Forste Saga, by which the Glassworthy is chiefly remembered. Others in the same series are Indian Summer of the Forsyte, 1918, in Five Tales, in Chancery, 1920, Awakening, 1920, To Let in 1921. The saga chronicles the lives of three generations of large upper middle class family at the turn of the century. Having recently risen to wealth and success in the professions and business world, the Forste are tenaciously clannish and anxious to increase their wealth. The novels imply that the desire for property is morally wrong. The saga interprets diatribes against wealth and living phases, describing characters and background. In The Man of Property, Glassworthy attacks the Forsters through the character of the Thomas Forsters, a solicitor who considered his wife Irene as a mere form of property. Glassworthy was also a successful dramatist. His plays, written in the naturalistic style, usually examining some controversial ethicals or social problem. They include the silver box, which, like many of other works, has a legal theme and depicts a bitter contrast of the law's treatment of the rich and the poor. Strife in 1909, a study of industrial relations, Justice 1910, a realistic portrayal of the prison life, and rose so much, feeling that it led to reform. And Loyalties in 1922, the best of his later plays, he also wrote verse. The story of Forstay family after World War I was continued in The White Monkey, The Silver Spoon 1926, and The Swan Song 1928. Collected a Modern Comedy 1929. Glassworthy's other novels include The Country House 1907, The Patrician 1911, and The Freelance in 1950. Quality is one of the known story of Mr. Gessler, a German shoemaker who used to live in London. Mr. Gessler was a person who was known as the best shoemaker in the town, and he also used best leather. The Gessler brother shop was run by two brothers who made beautiful boots. His brothers were people of skilled craftsmanship, hence, their shoes were never worn out. Even though they made shoes of high quality, but they did not have more takers because they couldn't be able to make shoes or advertise their product to one and even to all. The Gessler brother believed that the quality of their work, their boots, would speak for themselves. Mr. Gessler could not come round to thinking of selling something which he considered an art. It was with this value that the Gessler brothers maintained their tradition of making the best tools or best boots in town, quality and consistently till their death, because they were not business guys but artists. The story starts with the description of the boot shop. On the top was a nameplate, Gessler Brother, and a few shoes displayed on the window. They make shoes on order. The narrator then narrates one of his meetings with Mr. Gessler. He says it has been possible to go to him much because the shoes he made has lasted very long, are the best of their kind. One day, the narrator goes to their shop to get a pair of Russian leather shoes. Mr. Gessler retreats upstairs and comes back after some time holding a fine golden Russian leather piece. After the narrator's approval, he says he'll get his shoes tomorrow fortnight. One day, the narrator goes to their boot shop and tells him that the last shoes he got from him crack. After a long pause, Mr. Jester asks him to bring the shoes to him. He assures that if he can't repair them, he will give the money back. Another day, he goes to the Jesters Brothers to order a new pair, wearing a pair of shoes which he bought due to some emergency from a big firm. Mr. Jessler at once recognized that the shoes are not made by him. He touches a particular spot on the narrator's shoes where it isn't comfortable for the narrator and says that it hurts there. He expresses his contempt that those large films attract customers through shiny, impressive advertisement to sell their inferior quality product. Then the author explains to him under what circumstances he had to buy those shoes. The new shoes lasted nearly 2 years, and in the next visit, he received quite a shock When he enters the shop, he sees the younger Gessler brother who inform him of the elder Gessler's death. That day, he orders several pairs. It takes longest to make them, but the quality is even better than the previous one. Soon after, the narrator leaves for abroad and returns after over a year. The first shop he goes to is Mr. Jessler. Mr. Jessler, now 75, is unable to recognize him at first. Narrator gives a huge order. The wait is longer than ever, but the quality only gets better. After a week, while passing the little street, the narrator thinks to go in and tell Mr. Jessler that the boots are perfect. But when he goes to the place where the shop was, the nameplate is no longer there. Disturbed, he goes into the shop and young English face greets him. The narrator inquires about Mr. Jessler and come to know of the young Jessler death. Upon hearing this, the narrator is quite shocked. The young man explained to him that Jessler died from starvation. He used to devote himself of shoemaking so much that he used to forget about everything else. All the money went in the rents and the leather. The fate was quite obvious from the beginning, but both the narrator and the young man agrees that the Jester brothers made good quality boots. Now I am going to read and explain the paragraph wise. I knew him from the days of my extreme youth because he made my father's boot. He lived with his elder brother in a shop which was in a small by street in a fashionable part of London. This chapter is about a shoemaker who lived and had shoe shop in a part of the London city. Mr. Jessler, as he was known, was a person who took his shoes making job very seriously. In fact, he was devoted to it. And as the story progresses, we find how his passion for work eventually brought about his downfall in business, which led to his actual starvation and death. The story also brings before us the hardship of any business and in order to survive in the market and the competition. One has to compromise with the quality of the product, which Mr. Jessler never did and had to suffer and lose his life. In the first paragraph of this chapter, we can find the narrator of the story narrates the events about Mr. Jessler as they unfold from time to time. I knew him from the time of my youth, when I was very young, and used to visit Mr. Jessler's shoe shop with my father. My father was a regular customer to his shop, and whenever he visited the shoe shop, I was with him. Most of the time, Mr. Jester lived and worked in the shop along with the elder brother. His shop was located in somewhat interior section of London. The shop was in a fashionable part of the London in this interior section. Now let's move to the next paragraph. The shop had a certain quiet distinction. There was no sign upon it other than the name of the Justice brothers. And in the window, a few pairs of boots. He made only what was ordered, and what he made never failed to fit. To make boots, such boots are he made, seem to be then and still seems to me mysterious and wonderful. Though this shop was not in a fashionable part of the London and in comparison to the shops stood apart, it had no sign board on fashionable lights or displaying board on fashionable lights on displaying board, just a name of Gesture Brothers, which stood just above in large window with displayed a few pair of boots. The Jasher brother never made shoes for selling. General people, rather, they made these boots only for the people who ordered them to be made. The boots that the Jester brother made were of the remarkable quality and would comfortably fit in the feet of the customer. The narrator says how wonderfully these boots would fit a customer feet was mysteriously remarkable, and until the end I am unable to understand how this happened. Such great was the craftsmanship of Jester brother. Now let's move to the third paragraph. I remember well my shy remarks one day while stretching out to him my youthful foot. Isn't it awfully hard to do, Mr. Jessler? And his answer given with a sudden smile from out of the redness of his beard. It, it an aren't? The narrator narrates one incident when during his youth he was in the shop to get his pair of boots which he had ordered. As he was trying out his pair and was stretching his foot inside the shoe to fit properly, he looked at Justler and said, "That is one difficult to get his feet inside the shoes. This pair was very hard." And quickly Jester replied that to make such a boot was an art. It was an work of art to produce such a thing. In other words, he meant that try a little more and after a little while the boots would comfortably fit in my feet. Now let's move to the next paragraph. It was not possible to go him very often. His boots lasted terribly, having something beyond the temporary, some essence of boot stitch into them. One day, one went in, not as into the most shops, but the restfully as one enters a church, and sitting on a single wooden chair waited a guttural sound, and the tip tap of the slippers beating the narrow wooden stairs, and he would stand before one without coat, a little bent in a leather apron, with the sleeves turned back, blinking, and if awakened from some dream of boots. Boots made by Mr. Jessler was of such a remarkable quality that people who got their boots made by Jessler lasted for a very long period, and people would return back for a new pair only after 2 or more years to get a new one. So we see that the boots were made with a deep commitment, which was clearly evident in the pair which were produced. The Jester brother shop was evidently different from all the other shops. It had a certain kind of dignity and an air of the authority about itself. And when a person entered the shop, he felt as he had entered a church where the whole atmosphere was solemn and dignified, where a person himself started behaving in an orderly manner, leaving behind all the undignified behavior one had to enter and sit quietly in the single wooden chair. Slowly, Mr. Jessler would walk down and wooden stair, his slippers creating a tip tap sound on the stairs. He would walk down to the customer and stand in front of you with the leather apron, his shirt sleeve folded up blinking his eyes and standing a little bent, standing in front of you, as if awakened recently from a dream. It's a wonderful description of John Glassworthy of this in this paragraph. You can see how pious and great man, great craftsman he was. Ready to take a new order of making a pair of boots. And when I asked Mr. Jessler to make me a pair of Russian leather boots without saying a word, he would leave me sitting on the lonely wooden chair and experiencing the smell of the leather, which was evidence of the Mr. Jessler trade of shoes making. He would go into the inner portion on the shop and return back with a golden brown piece of leather and holding it and staring it admiringly. He would appreciate the leather, would ask me if I liked it after my approval. He would ask in his German accent, "When do you want them?" "As soon as possible," I would reply. Mr. Jessler would then reply, "I would ask my elder brother and would let you know." Thanking him, I would bid him good morning and leave his shop. Mr. Jessler would reply back the greeting while looking intently at the piece of leather in his hand, and I move out. I could hear Mr. Jessler's moving upstairs while his shoes making the same tip tap sound as he climbed up the stairs into his own personal world of Leatherland. And I would say, I'm reading, and I would say, "How do you do, Mr. Jessler? Could you make me a pair of Russian leather boots?" Without a word, he would leave me retiring whence he came or into the other portion of the shop. And I would continue to rest in the wooden chair, inhaling the essence of the trade. Soon he would come back, holding in his hand a piece of gold brown leather with eyes fixed on it would be remarked, "What a beautiful piece." When I too had admired it, he would speak again, "When do you want them?" And I would answer, "Oh, as soon as you conveniently can." And he would say, "Tomorrow fortnight." Or if he were his elder brother, "I will ask my brother." Then I would murmur, "Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Jessler, good morning." He would reply, still looking at the leather in his hand. And as I moved to the door, I would hear the tip tap of the slippers going up the stairs to his dream of boots. Mr. Justice moving upstairs while his shoes making the same tip tap sound as he climbed up the stairs into his own personal world of Leatherland. I cannot forget that day on which I had occasion to say to him, "Mr. Jessler, the last pair of boots creaked, you know." He looked at me for a time without replying, as if expecting me to withdraw or qualify the statement, then said, "I should be the outgreeted. It did, I'm afraid. You got them wed before they found themselves." "I don't think so." At that, he lowered his eyes as if hunting for memory of those boots. And I felt sorry. I had mentioned this grave thing, gent them back. He said, I will look at them. Zone boots, he continued slowly, are bad from boots. If I can do nothing with them, I take them off, you will. Once only, I went absent mindedly into his shop in a pair of boots bought in an emergency at some large firm. He took my older order without showing me any leather, and I could feel his eyes penetrating the inferior covering of my foot. At last he said, those are not my boots. The tone was not one of anger, nor of sorrow, not even of the contempt, but there was in it something quite that froze the blood. He put his hand down and pressed a finger on the place where the left boot was not quite comfortable. It hurts you there, he said. Those big ones have no self respect. And then, as if something had given way within him, he spoke long and bitterly. It was the only time I ever heard this discuss the condition and hardship of his trade. The narrator talks of one important incident when, on one occasion, the boots did not fit well and creaked or gave a creaking sound when I walked. Shoes often make this kind of creaking sound, but Mr. Gracer's shoes were of very high quality, and I never thought that they would give out such a sound. And when I told him that, he just stood there without any emotion or expression, and after a while he replied that the shoes might have got wet, which has caused such a fall to appear in the wonderfully made pair of shoes. He seemed upset, and the shoes he made were giving trouble to a customer, which was a very rare thing. I also felt bad of bringing up such a thing before the old shoemaker. He again said, send back the shoes to me. I will take a look at them. Some pair of shoes are just created bad. You cannot do much about them. If I am unable to mend it, I will not change for the making charges of your boots. The narrator recalls another incident when he went into the Mr. Gresher's shoes, wearing boots which he had bought in an emergency for a large firm. On this occasion, he took my order without showing me any leather first, as he usually did. He kept staring at my inferior quality shoes, and when he could not restrain himself any more, he asked me a question, or rather, a statement was put before me. Those are not my boots, meaning you have got these poor quality shoes from somewhere else, which are easily displaying the cheap quality of the leather and craftsmanship all around. Mr. Jessler showed his disliking for my cheap pair of shoes, but it was without any bad intentions or anger or sorrow, but his attitude was such that one could easily sense the disliking tone, and intention of the old shoes maker. As he stood there, the old man bent and pressed his finger at the place where the shoe was most uncomfortable. Such was the skillfulness of the old shoemaker, who could easily detect the fault in the shoes by just looking at them. He could easily pinpoint the position where the manufacturing defect was. His eyes were so precise and skilled in this business. After detecting the fault, he spoke out. That is where it hurts you. Those big shoes firms are like thieves who have no self respect. They would make anything to make a good earning. They have least concern for the comfort of the customer. He kept on speaking with contempt for the big firms, manufacturers who only thought of themselves and very little for the customers. This was the first time that I had heard his speak so bitterly about the ins and outs of the shoemaking trade. So that's all for today. Before concluding the video, I would like to revise the word meaning which are given in this first part of the story. The first word is it is an art said with the German accent. Lasted terribly, lasted very long. Guttural, harsh and grating. Incense, the smell of the leather is compared to the smell of the essence in a church. When a beautiful piece, when do you want them? Fortnight, brother. So that's all for today. Tomorrow we will continue the next part of the story, quality. Till then, bye bye.